Namaskar. Welcome to Katha Kahani Kavya. My name is Manisha. Our today's topic is basic Hindu religious ideas. Om. Part 1, Chapter 5, Sacrifice. The idea of offering sacrifices is very familiar in India, but a student needs to understand the principle which underlies all sacrifices, so that he may realize that everyone should sacrifice himself to the good of others, and that all sacrifice of other things are meant to teach a man how he ought at last to sacrifice himself. The first thing to grasp is that creation is sacrifice. Ishvara confines himself, limits himself in matter in order that a universe may be made manifest. Shruti and Smriti alike proclaim this truth, as in the Purusha Sukta of Rigveda or as in the allusion by Sri Krishna to the formal sacrifice that causes the birth of beings. Immersion in this matter is in spiritual language called death, and Ishvara thus sacrificed himself in order that he might bring into separate being portions of himself. The jivas who might develop all his powers in matter in an infinite variety of forms. This is the primary sacrifice, and on this is based the law. This also gives us the meaning of sacrifice. It is the pouring out of life for the benefit of others. The law of sacrifice is the law of life for all jivas. In the earlier stages of their growth, they are forcibly sacrificed, and so progressive involuntarily, without their own consent or even knowledge, their forms being violently wrenched away from them, and they propelled into new ones, a little more developed. Thus the jivas of the mineral kingdom are prepared to pass on into the vegetable by the breaking up of their mineral bodies for the support of plants. The jivas of the vegetable kingdom are prepared to pass on into the animals by the breaking up of their vegetable bodies for the support of animal life. The jivas of animal kingdom are prepared to pass on into the human by the breaking up of their bodies for the support of other animals, of savages, and of certain types of men. And even the jivas of human kingdom are prepared to rise into higher races by breaking up of their human bodies for the support of other human lives in cannibalisms, war, etc. In all these cases, the bodies are sacrificed for the benefit of others, without the assent of embodied consciousness. Only after untold ages does the jiva recognize in the body the universality of the law and begin to sacrifice his own upadhis deliberately for the good of those around him. This is called self-sacrifice and is the showing forth of the divinity of the jiva, the proof that he is of the nature of Ishvara. A wonderful story of uttermost self-sacrifice is told in the Mahabharatam. Indra, the king of the Devas, was sore beset by Asura Vritra, born of the wrath of a rishi, whom Indra had offended by an unrighteous act. Vritra, heading the Daityas, defeated Indra and his armies in battle, drove him away from his capital, Amravati, and took away his sovereignty. Long the Devas wandered with their king in exile, and repeatedly they made endeavor to regain their capital, but were vanquished again and again. Finally, they learned that the righteous wrath of Rishi could not be allayed, except by the voluntary self-sacrifice and pity of another Rishi, and that Vritra could be slain by no other weapon than the thunderbolt made with the self-given bones of a holy one. And they went eagerly to the Rishi Dadichi and told their woeful tale to him. And he was filled with a great pity and said, I give to you my body willingly to make what use of it you like. And when their artificer Vishwakarma shrank from laying a rude and painful hand upon that shining body of purity and tapas, Dadiji smiled and said, Cover this body up with salt. Bring here a herd of cows. They shall lick off the salt and flesh together, and you shall take the bones which only you require. And so naught of this body shall be wasted. And this was done, and Vritra fell before the might born of that wondrous sacrifice. The jiva is led up to this point by the teachings of the rishis, who bid him make sacrifices of his possessions for a good that he does not receive immediately. They show him that when a man sacrifices to others, his gifts return to him increased in the future. A man is to sacrifice some of his goods, which may be looked on as outlying pieces of himself, and he is promised that this act of self-denial shall bring him increased possessions. Next, he was taught to make similar sacrifices and to deny himself present enjoyment in order that he might lay up for himself increased happiness on the other side of death in Swarga. Thus, the practice of sacrificing was made habitual, and man, by sacrificing his possessions in the hope of reward, prepared to learn that it was his duty to sacrifice himself in the service of others, and to find in the joy of that service his reward. Another lesson taught in these sacrifices was the relation man bears to all the beings round him. That he is not a solitary, isolated life, but that all lives are interdependent and can only prosper permanently as they recognize this interdependence. The rishis taught him to sacrifice daily to the devas, to rishis, to ancestors, to men and animals, and showed him that as all these made sacrifices to enrich his life, he had incurred to them a debt, a duty which he must pay by sacrifice. As he lives on others, he must, in common honesty, live for others. Sacrifice is right, a thing that ought to be done, that is, owed. Finally, as the jiva recognizes his percentage, his identity in nature with Ishvara, sacrifice becomes happiness, a delight, and the pouring out of life for others is felt as a joyous exercise of innate divine powers. Instead of seeing how much he can take and how little he can give, he tries to see how little he can take and how much he can give. He begins to look very carefully into what he takes for the support of his own upadhis, and seeks to reduce to the lowest point the sufferings inflicted by the breaking up of lower forms for his support. He abandons the food and the amusements which inflict pain on sentient beings and tries to become the friend of all creatures. He realizes that while the preying of animals on animals, of men on men, and the slaughter of animals by men for food or sport are necessary at certain stages of evolution for the development of needed faculties and powers, men should gradually evolve from these and cultivate the faculties of gentleness, sympathy, and tenderness, regarding the weaker as young selves to be helped, instead of as victims to be immolated. As a man lives in such thoughts of his non-separateness from younger selves, he begins to feel more really his non-separateness from elder selves and from the universal parent, Ishvara. Slowly, he realizes that his true function is to live for others, as Ishvara lives for all, and that his true happiness lies in becoming a channel in which the life of Ishvara is flowing, a willing instrument to do the will of Ishvara. then every action becomes a sacrifice to Ishvara and actions no longer bind him. Thus, the law of sacrifice becomes also the law of liberation. स प्रजा सृष्टवा पुरोवाच प्रजापति अनेन प्रसविष्य ध्वमेश वो असि त्वष्ट कामधुक् देवान् भावयतानेन ते देवा भावयन्तु वः परस्परं भावयन्तः श्रेयः परम वापस्यथ इष्टानुभोगान् हि वो देवा दास्यन्ते यज्ञ भावितः तैर्दत्तान् प्रदायैभ्यो यो भुङ्क्ते स्तेन एव सः यज्ञशिष्टाशिनः सन्तो मुच्यन्ते सर्वकिल्बिषैः भुजन्ते ते त्वघं पापा ये पचन्त्यात्मकारणात् अन्नाद् भवन्ति भूतानि पर्जन्यादन्नसम्भवः यज्ञात् भवति पर्जन्यो यज्ञः कर्म समुद्भवः कर्म ब्रह्मोद्भवम् विधि ब्रह्मक्षर समुद्भवम् तस्मात् सर्वगतं ब्रह्म नित्यं यज्ञे प्रतिष्ठितम्. Having in ancient times emanated mankind together with sacrifice, Prajapati declared, by this shall ye propagate, with this to you the Kamadhuk. With this nourish ye the Devas, and may the Devas nourish you. Thus, nourishing one another, ye shall reap the supremest good. For nourished by sacrifice, the Devas shall bestow on you the enjoyments you desire. A thief verily is he who enjoyeth what is given by them without returning them aught. The righteous who eat the remains of the sacrifice are freed from all sins, but the impious who dress food for their own sakes, they verily eat sin. From food creatures come forth. From rain is the production of food. Rain proceeds from sacrifice. Sacrifice arises out of action. Know thou from Brahma, the Veda, action growth, and Brahma, the Veda, from imperishable cometh. Therefore, Brahman, the all-permeating, is ever present in sacrifice. Kangshantam karmanam siddhim yajant ihi devatah kshipram hi manushe loke siddhir bhavati karmaja. They who long after success in action on earth sacrifice to the Devas, for in brief space, verily, in this world of men, success is born of action. Avam rajana vadvare bhavrityam havye bhirindra varuna namobhihi asme indra varuna vishwavaram rayam dhattam vasumantam urukshum yamindram varunamashtume gihi pravattoke tanaye tu jana. O kings, Indra, Varuna, to this our sacrifice be ye turned by offerings and homage. O Indra, Varuna, plenteous wealth and food and blessings give us. This, my song, may it reach Indra, Varuna, and by its force bring sons and offspring. Eteshu yascharte bhrajamaneshu यथा कालम चाहूतयो हाददायन तनयन्तेतः सूर्यस्य रश्मयो यत्र देवानां पतिरेको अधिवासः एह्येहिति तमाहुतयः सुरवचसः सूर्यस्य रश्मिभिर्यजमानं वहन्ति प्रियां वाचं भिवदन्तयो अर्चयन्तयः एषुभः Punya Sukrito Brahmalokaha. Whoever works, sacrifices, pouring libations into the shining of these, the 7 flames previously mentioned. At the proper time, him these sun rays lead where dwells the one Lord of the Devas. Saying to him, "Come, come," these resplendent liberations carry the sacrificer by the sun rays, worshipping him and saying the sweet words, "This is your pure, well-deserved Brahma world." यज्ञशिष्टामृतभुजो यान्ति ब्रह्म सनातनम् नायं लोको असत्य यज्ञस्य कुन्तो अन्यः कुरु सत्तम. The eaters of the life, giving remains of sacrifice, go to the eternal Brahman. This world is not for the non-sacrificer, much less the other, O best of the Kurus. गतसङ्गस्य मुक्तस्य ज्ञानावस्थितचेतसः यज्ञयाचरतः कर्म samagram pravilyate. From one with attachment dead, harmonious, with his thoughts established in wisdom, his works, sacrifices, all karmas melt away. Yad karoshi, yad shanasi, yad juhoshi dadasi yat, yad pasyasi 𝐂𝐿𝐤 tat kurushva madarpanam, shubhashubh phalairaiva mokshase karma bandhaneh. Whatsoever thou doest, whatsoever thou eatest, whatsoever thou offerest, whatsoever thou givest, whatsoever thou doest of austerity, O 𝐂𝐿𝐤, do thou that as an offering unto me. Thus shalt thou be liberated from the bonds of action, yielding good and evil fruits. Om